If you are a photographer or content creator, chances are you know what a camera is or you are looking to get one. Now, if you're looking to get one or you know what it is, you've probably heard of terms like DSLR, mirrorless, focal length, aperture, full frame, and crop sensor. Now, what do all these terms mean and how do they affect the content that you make? Stick around, let's find out. Welcome to today's video, and today we're going to be looking at some camera basics to help you decide the best camera for your content creation. But now, before we get into the technical stuff, let me first start off by saying the camera that you choose and the lenses you choose all depend on what content you make. So even though you have tens of thousands of cameras you can choose from, not really that many, but although there are so many you can choose from, the decision to what sort of camera, what sort of lenses you choose should come down to what you shoot. For example, if you are a sports photographer and you do sports or motorsports, the amount of frames or images your camera can capture per second is going to be the most important factor in any choice you're going to make, because you're going to want to track that target with your camera, shoot as many pictures as you possibly can so you can get that one picture where his eyes are either not closed or that car driving through the river is that perfect shot with not too much water and not water all over the windshield, if you kind of get what I mean. Now, if you're going to be doing landscape photography, the amount of pictures your camera can take per second is not going to be that important, as landscape is not going to run away. So with that being said, always choose the camera for the task it's going to be doing, and then choose a camera for all the extra features such as Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, whatever else you need. So firstly, we have DSLR versus mirrorless. Now, the biggest differences between DSLR cameras and mirrorless cameras are the fact that a mirrorless camera doesn't have the mirror inside of the camera. To quickly show you what's going on the inside of DSLR camera, you have a lens which lets light through, which then hits a little mirror on the inside, which then reflects that up to another mirror and into another mirror, and then out of your viewfinder. That is how you see the image through that little hole in your camera that you're actually taking a picture of. Now, this is called an optical viewfinder because you are making use of mirrors and not technology. Now, once you press that live view, which shows you the image on your screen on the camera, that mirror flips up, and then the image that is being projected on the screen is actually the image that is hit on the sensor. With a mirrorless camera, you are just taking all of those mirrors out and you are left with a mirrorless camera. Now, because you don't need those mirrors that need to be able to flip, you can have a smaller camera with less weight, which usually makes mirrorless cameras smaller and more lightweight. Now, of course, there's other differences between them as well. DSLR cameras still tend to have higher frame rates, so if you're looking at a camera that can shoot more pictures per second, you're most likely going to be looking at a higher end DSLR camera or a very high end mirrorless camera, as mirrorless cameras still don't have all of the capability that DSLR cameras have. Now, usually people who travel a lot and people who do vlogging might need to look into mirrorless cameras as they are smaller, lighter, which means you can take a whole lot more with you if you're flying or if you're traveling by car. Also, if you're going to be holding up a camera like this the entire day and looking at it, saving as much weight as you possibly can is a must. Now, of course, there's going to be other reasons why you would choose a DSLR and a mirrorless. As I said before, if you are a sports photographer and you're looking for a camera with a lot of pictures per second with a high frame rate, you're most likely going to be looking at some sort of DSLR camera compared to a mirrorless camera. And also, if you haven't chosen a camera yet and you don't have a very specific goal, I would suggest looking at mirrorless cameras, as they are not that expensive anymore and they're just a new technology. Focus on what's new, get rid of the old. The next thing is full frame versus crop sensor. Now, full frame got its name from the old film days where the film size is that now of a full frame. So you used to get a frame in a film and that's the size of a full frame. Now, if you look at a crop sensor, it's just a cropped version of that full frame. That's why it's called a crop sensor, or more commonly known by their professional names as APS-C or micro 2/3. Now the difference is with crop sensors is you don't lose quality, it's just being cropped, so it's as if you're taking a full frame shot and just cropping it in without losing quality. Now with the crop sensor, there's a little thing you need to be cautious of, and that is that there is a crop factor. Now I have an APS-C sensor, which is a crop factor of 1.6, which means that any lens I put on my camera, I have to take the focal length and multiply that by 1.6. Now the only thing that really means is that means with a 24 on my camera, I multiply that by 1.6, and that is the same focal length I would have had if I had a full frame, just because you're cropping in. So in essence, it's almost like you're zooming in further than you actually are. So that is kind of something you need to take notice of. So if you want something really wide, using a 24mm might not work. You might need to go down to something like a 14. And if you want to zoom in very far, you can also buy lenses that are much weaker. So for instance, if you want to zoom into almost 200, you can just buy up to 100 lens and you'll get a zoom of up to 160. Now just one thing to point out, you do not get the benefits of using that same lens. So if you're using a lens that can zoom and you want that telephoto effect, you're still going to have to zoom into the same amount as you would on a full frame to get the same effect, even though you are zoomed in further. Now, one thing to keep in mind also, if you are looking at doing low light photography, you might be looking at something that has a full frame, as full frame sensors are much more sensitive to light, so they do perform better in low light conditions. So if you are a streamer, or if you are a photographer or videographer that's going to be taking a lot of pictures or videos in low light areas or in low light conditions, you might need to look at getting a full frame sensor camera instead of a APS-C sensor. Now of course, do not let this discourage you from buying an APS-C sensor, as they still perform extremely well, and we will kind of work out something you can still get more light into the sensor in the next part, and that is aperture and focal length. Now aperture and focal length are not something that's in the camera, but that is in the lens. Now aperture, these blades that kind of open and close, the opening either smaller or wider of the lens, and the focal length is how far you can zoom in or out with that lens. Now how aperture works is the lower that number, or the lower the f-stop or aperture, the wider open that lens is going to be, so letting in more light. And the higher that number, the smaller it's going to be. Now if you're using a lens like I am with an f2.8, you're getting a whole lot of light in there. And another benefit of using a low f-stop is also that blurry background. So one thing to remember is the lower the f-stop, the more light you're letting in, and also the more blurry your background is going to be. Now one way you can also achieve this is with a higher f-stop but zoomed in further, because the more you zoom in, the more you compress that background against your target or your subject, and the more blurry that background will be. So I could achieve the same effect with f4 but at a zoom of 40mm, for instance. Now using a low f-stop helps with setting a more cinematic feel when you're making videos, and it also helps bring out the subject or your model when you are taking pictures. So if you have a product that you want to advertise, or you have a model and you don't really care about the background all that much, you can help that product or model just pop out of the image by having a nice background blur and having them in focus. Now if you don't want that background blur, you can always just turn up your aperture to a much higher number, and that will remove the background blur and help keep everything in focus. And now that we've gone through all of these, it is time for you to know what you're taking your pictures of and what you're going to be doing, so you can then choose the best camera focal length and aperture size for whatever you're going to be doing. So let's say you are into astrophotography, you might need to look at getting a full frame camera with a lens that has a very low aperture so you can get as much light in as possible, and of course a big focal length so you can zoom into the sky and get that perfect starry night without having everybody in the neighborhood as well. Of course, if you're going to be taking photography of the entire night sky, having a 14 or 24mm might work, but usually you tend to want to zoom in, get more of the stars and less of the environment. And also remember, if you have a crop sensor and you have a 24mm lens, it's going to look more like a 38mm as you have that crop factor of 1.6, even though it's not going to give you the benefits of a 38mm. And that is it for today's camera basics video. If you want me to go into more specific topics, if you are doing certain type of photography and you don't know which camera to buy, please leave it down in the description below. I'll look at all of those. Then we can look at making a better video in the future with more specific content. And also remember, if you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe. I really do appreciate that. That will help me out a lot. If you have questions you want to ask me live, I live stream on Twitch every Sunday, Monday, and Wednesday afternoon. Feel free to pop in, say hello, ask your questions there. Until next time, cheers.